The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across Vivian's dining room as she raised her wine glass with that familiar condescending smile. "Emily, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "tell everyone what you do at the hospital. You're just a receptionist, right?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the table, Ryan's family members turned their attention to me, waiting for my response. I felt my hands begin to tremble beneath the white tablecloth as nervous laughter rippled through the group. My husband Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside me but said nothing to defend me. "I work at St. Mary's Hospital," I managed to say, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I help people when they need medical care." Vivian's laugh was sharp and cutting. "How sweet. Do you even understand what real work is like? What real responsibility feels like?" She gestured dramatically toward the other guests. "We have doctors and lawyers here tonight. People who actually save lives and make important decisions." I excused myself quietly, mumbling something about needing air. As I walked toward the bathroom, I heard Vivian's voice behind me, not bothering to whisper, "At least she's pretty." Ryan could have done much worse than a receptionist. I didn't go home to cry that night. Instead, I drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital, my hands still shaking from Vivian's humiliation. The security guard nodded respectfully as I swiped my badge and headed for the locker room. I changed out of my dinner dress and into my surgical scrubs, the familiar routine calming my racing heart. "Dr. Carter," my resident called as I entered the neurosurgery wing. "We have a craniotomy scheduled for tomorrow morning, and the trauma cases from tonight are stable." Dr. Carter. Not receptionist. Not just anything. Chief of Neurosurgery at one of the city's most prestigious hospitals. The woman who had performed over 300 successful brain surgeries. The doctor who had published research papers that changed how we treated stroke patients. But none of them knew. Not Ryan's family, not even Ryan himself really understood what I did every day. To them, I was Emily the receptionist, the pretty little wife who answered phones and filed papers. My pager buzzed urgently. Emergency surgery. A car accident victim with severe head trauma. I scrubbed in quickly, letting the familiar ritual wash away the humiliation from dinner. In the operating room, I was Dr. Emily Carter. Here, my hands didn't shake. Here, I saved lives. The secret had started innocently enough. When I first met Ryan at a coffee shop 3 years ago, he was immediately intimidated when I mentioned being a neurosurgeon. "Wow," he had said, his face falling slightly. "That's incredible. I'm just an accountant. You probably save more lives in a week than I'll help in my entire career." I watched his confidence crumble before my eyes. This funny, kind man who had made me laugh for 2 hours suddenly seemed small and insecure. When he asked what I did again on our second date, I found myself saying, "I work at the hospital. In administration." It wasn't technically a lie. I did work at the hospital, and as chief of neurosurgery, I did handle administrative duties. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Over time, the story evolved. Hospital administration became hospital assistant, which eventually became receptionist when we met his family. "I don't want them to think I'm dating you for your success," Ryan had explained when I suggested telling them the truth. "My mom already thinks I'm not ambitious enough. If she knows you're this important doctor, she'll think I'm even more of a failure." So I became Emily the receptionist. And slowly, I began to disappear. Ryan's birthday party was everything I expected from Vivian's planning skills. Elegant decorations, expensive catering, and carefully selected guests who would make her son look successful and important. What I hadn't expected was the deliberate humiliation she had planned for me. In front of 30 people, Vivian presented Ryan with an engraved gold pen. "For the man who's going places," she announced loudly. "Success comes to those who reach for it. Not everyone can understand that level of ambition." Her eyes found mine across the room, making sure I understood the message. Then came the real surprise. Laura walked through the front door like she owned the place, her lawyer confidence filling the room. Ryan's ex-girlfriend, the corporate attorney who had broken up with him 2 years ago because she was too focused on her career. "Laura!" Vivian exclaimed, embracing her warmly. "I'm so glad you could make it. Ryan has missed having someone who understands his professional world." Laura's smile was predatory as she approached me. "Emily, isn't it? Ryan mentioned you work at a hospital. Do you still answer phones, or have you moved up to filing?" Her voice carried just enough sweetness to make the insult sound like genuine interest. Around us, conversations continued, but I felt like everyone was watching, waiting to see how the receptionist would handle being put in her place. I sat in my car afterward, makeup streaked down my cheeks, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The parking lot was empty except for the catering trucks loading up the remnants of Ryan's perfect birthday party. Through the house windows, I could see Laura and Vivian laughing together while Ryan nodded along enthusiastically. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder, something I had started doing during particularly difficult days. "Day 1095 of being Emily the receptionist," I whispered to the camera. "Today I watched my husband's ex-girlfriend and his mother bond over how small and unimportant I am." My voice cracked as I continued. "I perform brain surgery. I save lives. I published a paper last month that will help thousands of stroke patients recover faster. But I let them erase me. I let them make me invisible because I was afraid of hurting my husband's feelings." The irony wasn't lost on me. I could operate on the most delicate parts of the human brain without my hands shaking, but I couldn't stand up to my mother-in-law at a dinner party. My hospital pager buzzed against my hip. "Emergency call." I looked at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. The name flashing across the display was Vivian Carter. The charity gala at the Riverside Hotel was in full swing when the call came in. Vivian had been holding court near the silent auction, regaling a group of society women with stories about her successful son and his quaint little wife. I heard the details later from witnesses who called 911. She had been mid-sentence, describing Laura as the kind of woman Ryan should have married, when she suddenly grabbed her head and collapsed. The massive brain aneurysm hit without warning, sending her crashing into a display of auction items as panicked guests screamed for help. Ryan's voice was hysterical when he called me. "Emily, something's wrong with Mom. They're taking her to St. Mary's. The paramedics said she needs a neurosurgeon immediately. Can you find out who's on call? Can you make sure she gets the best doctor?" I was already at the hospital, having been called in for the emergency. "I'll take care of it," I told him, which was more true than he could possibly understand. When the ambulance arrived, I was waiting in the trauma bay in my surgical scrubs. The paramedic looked at me with relief. "Dr. Carter, thank God you're here." 62-year-old female, massive aneurysm, blood pressure dropping fast. Behind him, I could see Ryan running through the hospital doors, still in his tuxedo from the gala. "What's her status?" I called out as the trauma team wheeled Vivian into the emergency bay. My voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded operating rooms for over a decade. Nurses immediately began following my orders, hooking up monitors and starting 4 lines. Ryan burst through the doors behind the gurney, his face pale with terror. "Where's the doctor? Where's the neurosurgeon?" he shouted at anyone who would listen. I stepped forward, stethoscope around my neck, surgical cap covering my hair. "I'm Dr. Carter, Chief of Neurosurgery. I'll be taking care of your mother." The recognition in Ryan's eyes was like watching someone solve a puzzle in slow motion. His mouth fell open as he stared at me, his receptionist wife, standing in surgical scrubs, commanding a team of medical professionals with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos of the trauma bay. "Blood pressure is dropping," my resident called out urgently. "We're losing her." The monitors began screaming as Vivian's vital signs crashed. Around us, the trauma team looked to me for direction. This was the moment that would define everything, not just Vivian's life, but the truth about who I really was. I looked directly at Ryan as I held out my hand. "Scalpel." The surgery lasted 8 hours. 8 hours of delicate microsurgery, removing the burst aneurysm and repairing the damage to Vivian's brain. My hands moved with practiced precision, guided by years of training and hundreds of similar procedures. The operating room was my domain, the place where titles and social hierarchies meant nothing compared to skill and knowledge. Twice during the surgery, Vivian flatlined. Twice, my team and I brought her back. CPR, defibrillation, emergency medications, we fought for every heartbeat while Ryan paced in the waiting room with no idea that his wife was the one holding his mother's life in her hands. At 3 a.m., I finally emerged from the operating room. My scrubs were soaked with sweat, my surgical mask had left marks on my face, and my hands ached from the intricate work. But Vivian was alive. Stable. The surgery had been successful. Ryan jumped up from his chair when he saw me approaching. Behind him, extended family members who had been called in during the night all turned to look at me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning recognition. The surgery went well, I announced, my voice hoarse from hours of concentration. She's stable and should make a full recovery. Ryan stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. You're a doctor, he stammered. I met his eyes steadily, still wearing my surgical scrubs and the confidence that came with saving someone's life. No, Ryan. I'm your mother's only chance. And I just gave her back to you. Word spread through the hospital faster than I had expected. By morning, nurses were whispering about Dr. Carter, the chief of neurosurgery who had operated on her own mother-in-law. The story was too dramatic to contain, the family who had looked down on the receptionist discovering she was actually the most skilled surgeon in the building. Local news stations picked up the story by afternoon. Hero surgeon saves mother-in-law's life in dramatic emergency surgery, read the headline crawling across the bottom of the television screen in Vivian's recovery room. When Vivian finally woke up, groggy from anesthesia and pain medication, she found me sitting beside her bed in my white coat. The same white coat I had hidden in my locker for 3 years to protect Ryan's ego. Her eyes struggled to focus as she tried to understand what she was seeing. Emily, she whispered, her voice weak and confused. I leaned forward, speaking gently. Yes, it's me. You had a brain aneurysm. I performed the surgery to repair it. You're going to be fine. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the medical equipment, the chart with my name listed as the attending physician, the respectful way the nurses addressed me as doctor. The reality was slowly sinking in. What? She struggled to find words. What have you done to me? Ryan tried to control the narrative from the moment he understood what had happened. You should have told us, he said repeatedly, as if my honesty would have somehow prevented his mother's medical emergency. How was I supposed to know you were a doctor? You told everyone you were a receptionist. The blame shifting was masterful. Instead of acknowledging that he had asked me to hide my career, he positioned himself as the victim of my deception. Instead of admitting he had been ashamed of dating someone more successful than him, he claimed I had deliberately misled his family. Vivian, still weak from surgery but sharp as ever, played her part perfectly. I'm so confused, she kept saying to visitors. Emily told us she worked at the front desk. Why would she lie about something like that? But I had been recording our conversations about my career for months, knowing this day might come. When Ryan finally admitted the truth during one of our arguments, I was ready. You were ashamed of me, I said quietly, my phone recording every word. You asked me to downplay my job because it made you feel small. You told your mother I worked reception because you couldn't handle people knowing your wife was more successful than you. Ryan's face went red with anger and embarrassment. That's not. I never said. But he couldn't finish the lie. Vivian's demand started the moment she was discharged from the hospital. Despite owing her life to my surgical skills, she couldn't let go of her need to control and diminish me. This surgery business is too stressful, she announced during her first visit home. Emily should quit and focus on being a proper wife. The irony was breathtaking. The woman whose life I had saved in an 8-hour surgery was now telling me to abandon the career that had made it possible. She wanted me to return to being the receptionist she could look down on, the safe little wife who made her son look important by comparison. You almost died because of people like you, I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. People who think women like me should stay small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of respect they're given. Vivian's face flushed with indignation. I almost died because of a medical condition, not because of my opinion about your career choices. No, I said, standing up to face her directly. You almost died because you've spent so much energy trying to make other people smaller that you forgot to appreciate the people who actually matter. The people who save lives. The people who show up when everything falls apart. She stared at me in shocked silence. For the first time since I had known her, Vivian Carter had no response. The celebration at St. Mary's Hospital was unlike anything I had experienced in my 3 years of hiding. My colleagues had organized a gathering to honor the successful surgery, but more than that, they were celebrating the revelation of who I really was. For the first time, my two worlds, Emily the wife and Dr. Carter the surgeon, existed in the same space. Ryan showed up uninvited, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He pushed through the crowd of medical professionals, all of whom treated me with the respect that came with my position and achievements. The contrast between their attitude and his family's condescension was stark and uncomfortable. This is humiliating, he hissed in my ear as colleagues congratulated me on the surgery. Having my wife's coworkers throw parties like she's some kind of hero. You're making me look like an idiot. Dr. Patterson, the hospital's chief of medicine, overheard the comment. He was a distinguished man in his 60s who had mentored me throughout my career. Humiliation, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen everything in 40 years of medicine. Your wife saved your mother's life with one of the most complex surgeries I've seen in decades. If that humiliates you, the problem isn't with her achievements. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Around us, conversations had stopped as people waited to see how he would respond to being called out by the chief of medicine. Finding the text messages on Ryan's phone felt like discovering a script for a play I hadn't known I was in. He had left it charging on the kitchen counter while he showered, and Laura's name appeared repeatedly in his notifications. Curiosity overrode privacy, and what I found confirmed my worst suspicions. This whole thing with Emily being a doctor is so weird, Laura had texted. I can't believe she lied about her job for so long. What else is she hiding? Ryan's response was even worse, I know. I feel like I don't even know who I married. At least when I thought she was just a receptionist, I understood our relationship. Now everything feels upside down. The conversation continued for weeks, with Laura positioning herself as emotional support for Ryan's difficult situation. She validated his feelings of betrayal and confusion, carefully nurturing his resentment while positioning herself as the understanding alternative. The final message made everything clear, your mom was right about us, Ryan. We made sense together. We were equals. Maybe it's time to admit this marriage was a mistake. Below that, Vivian had sent her own message to the group chat, Laura would make a much better match for our family. Emily has proven she can't be trusted. I screenshotted everything before quietly packing my bags. Some betrayals are too complete to forgive. I left our house with nothing but my surgical equipment, my diplomas, and a suitcase of clothes. Ryan called after me as I loaded my car, his voice switching between anger and panic as he realized I was actually leaving. You're being dramatic, he shouted from the front steps. So I talked to Laura. So what? You lied about your job for 3 years. At least I never pretended to be someone I wasn't. The projection was perfect. Ryan had created the lie about my career, encouraged it, and used it to protect his own ego. But now that the truth was out, somehow I was the deceiver and he was the victim. The mental gymnastics required for that level of self-deception would have been impressive if they weren't so destructive. I'm done making myself small to protect your feelings, I said calmly, closing my car trunk with finality. I'm done pretending that saving lives is less important than preserving your pride. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a call from a local news station. The story of the surgeon who had saved her own mother-in-law was gaining traction, and they wanted an interview. For the first time in 3 years, someone wanted to hear from Dr. Emily Carter, not Emily the receptionist. I answered the phone and agreed to tell my story. The interview aired on the local morning show 3 days later. I sat across from anchor Karen Phillips in my best professional suit, my surgeon's confidence replacing the apologetic demeanor I had worn for too long. When she asked about hiding my career, I spoke honestly about the pressure to make others comfortable with their own insecurities. Never let someone else's opinion shrink your worth, I said, looking directly into the camera. I spent 3 years hiding my achievements because I was afraid of making someone else feel small. But making yourself smaller doesn't actually help anyone grow. It just teaches them that your dreams don't matter. The interview went viral within hours. Women across the country shared their own stories of downplaying their success to protect fragile egos. The hashtag don't shrink yourself started trending as people discussed the pressure to minimize their achievements for others' comfort. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and messages of support from women who had hidden their own light to avoid threatening others. The story had touched something universal about the ways successful women are expected to apologize for their accomplishments. But I knew Vivian was watching. And I knew she was fighting an internal battle between pride and the need to be right. Ryan and Vivian's attempt to discredit me was swift and predictable. They gave their own interview to a competing news station, claiming I had lied about my identity and deceived the family for years. They painted themselves as victims of my elaborate deception, conveniently omitting Ryan's role in creating and maintaining the lie. "We trusted her," Vivian said, her voice trembling with perfectly performed emotion. "We welcomed her into our family believing she was honest about who she was. Now we discover she's been living a double life. What kind of person does that?" The narrative was clever, frame my hidden career as evidence of dishonesty rather than examining why I had felt the need to hide it. Make me the villain in a story where I had literally saved Vivian's life. But they hadn't counted on the hospital's documentation. When reporters began investigating their claims, they found records proving I had never falsified anything. My employment records, my medical license, my board certifications, everything was legitimate and properly documented. More damaging to their credibility was the discovery of Ryan's social media posts over the past 3 years, consistently referring to me as his receptionist wife and making jokes about dating someone below his league. The evidence of his complicity in maintaining the lie was overwhelming. The backlash against Ryan and Vivian was swift and merciless. Vivian's charitable foundation lost major donors who were disgusted by her treatment of the doctor who had saved her life. Ryan's accounting firm suspended him pending investigation into his public conduct after clients expressed concern about his judgment and character. Social media was particularly brutal. Videos of our story were shared millions of times, with comment sections filled with people expressing outrage at their behavior. "Imagine being ungrateful to the person who saved your life because they were too successful for your ego," read one popular tweet that was shared thousands of times. Ryan's attempts to defend himself only made things worse. Every interview revealed more of his entitlement and resentment. When asked directly if he was proud of his wife's achievements, he struggled to give a convincing answer. The pause before his response became a viral meme about fragile masculinity. Vivian's friends began distancing themselves from the controversy. The society women who had once hung on her every word at charity events were now avoiding her calls. Her position as president of the hospital auxiliary board was quietly restructured to a less prominent role. 3 weeks after my interview aired, Ryan showed up at my temporary apartment, begging for another chance. I handed him divorce papers instead. The meeting with Ryan was held in a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we had first met 4 years earlier. He arrived looking haggard, his usual confidence replaced by desperation and defeat. The public humiliation had clearly taken its toll on him, and he was finally ready to acknowledge what he had done. "I made a mistake," he began, his voice shaking with emotion. "I was insecure about your success, and I handled it badly. But we can fix this. We can start over and be honest about everything." I listened patiently as he outlined his plan for rebuilding our marriage. Couples therapy, public apologies, a fresh start where he would proudly support my career. It sounded sincere, and maybe 3 months earlier, I would have been tempted to believe him. Instead, I slid the divorce papers across the table. This is the only conversation I'm willing to have, Ryan. I'm not interested in fixing a relationship that was built on making me smaller. His face crumpled as he realized I was serious. You can't throw away 4 years because of one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, I replied calmly. It was a deliberate pattern of diminishing my worth to protect your ego. That's not something that gets fixed with an apology and good intentions. My lawyer had prepared the papers weeks earlier. I was finally ready to stop negotiating my value. Vivian's complications developed suddenly, just as she was preparing to be discharged from her follow-up care. A blood clot had formed near the surgical site, threatening to cause another stroke. The emergency call came in while I was reviewing patient files in my office, and I recognized her name immediately on the trauma alert. When I arrived at her room, she was conscious but terrified. The monitors showed dangerous fluctuations in her vital signs, and her speech was slightly slurred from the clot's pressure on her brain. She looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes as I reviewed her charts. Please, she whispered, reaching for my hand with trembling fingers. You're the only doctor I trust. I know I don't deserve your help after everything I've done, but please don't let me die. The irony was overwhelming. The woman who had spent months belittling my career was now begging me to save her life again. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that all her social connections and wealth meant nothing when she needed actual expertise. I hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand. I'll take care of you, I promised. Because despite everything she had done, I was still a doctor first. The second surgery was successful, but the recovery gave Vivian time to think about the reality of her situation. As I checked on her progress the next morning, she finally broke down in tears, her composure cracking completely for the first time since I had known her. I hated you because you reminded me of everything I gave up, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I was brilliant once. I had plans for medical school, dreams of helping people. But I got married instead and spent 40 years watching other people achieve what I'd given up. The admission hung between us like a bridge across years of hostility. I understood suddenly that her cruelty had never really been about me. It had been about her own regrets and the choices she had made decades earlier. I don't hate you, Vivian, I said, squeezing her hand gently. But I won't let you hurt me again. Your regrets don't give you the right to diminish other people's achievements. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was understanding. And sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for. The divorce was finalized on a bright Tuesday morning in October. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, officially ending 4 years of marriage and 3 years of hiding who I was. The settlement was straightforward. We each kept what we had brought to the marriage, which meant I retained my home, my retirement accounts, and most importantly, my freedom. That afternoon, I signed a lease on a beautiful apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and space for a home office. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. I filled the space with plants and books and the medical journals I had hidden away to avoid making Ryan feel inadequate. The silence was profound. No more walking on eggshells around fragile egos. No more apologizing for my success or downplaying my achievements. No more pretending that other people's insecurities were my responsibility to manage. A week later, an invitation arrived in my mailbox. The Women's Leadership Conference wanted me to be their keynote speaker, addressing a topic I knew intimately, finding your voice after years of silence. I accepted immediately. It was time to help other women avoid the mistakes I had made. The auditorium was packed with over 2,000 women when I took the stage at the leadership conference. Looking out at their faces, I saw reflections of my own journey, successful women who had learned to make themselves smaller, accomplished professionals who apologized for their achievements, brilliant minds who had been taught that their success threatened others. They called me just a receptionist, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I call myself unstoppable. The applause was immediate and thunderous. For the next 40 minutes, I shared my story, the hiding, the shame, the moment of truth in the operating room, and the freedom that came from refusing to shrink anymore. I talked about the cost of making yourself smaller and the power that comes from owning your worth. Your achievements are not apologies, I concluded. Your success is not something to hide or minimize or make palatable for others. You are enough, exactly as you are, with all your brilliance and ambition and dreams intact. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But more importantly, I could see the recognition in their eyes, women understanding that they too had been shrinking themselves unnecessarily. In the back row, almost hidden among the crowd, I spotted a familiar figure. Vivian sat quietly, tears streaming down her face as she applauded. The transformation in Vivian was gradual but remarkable. She began volunteering at St. Mary's Hospital, working at the reception desk she had once looked down on. Watching her interact with patients and families, I saw glimpses of the woman she might have been if she had followed her original dreams of medical school. She never asked for forgiveness, but she found ways to make amends. When people asked about her connection to the hospital, she would say proudly, "My daughter-in-law is Dr. Emily Carter, Chief of Neurosurgery. She saved my life twice, once in surgery, and once from myself." The humility was genuine. She had learned, perhaps too late, that respect comes from what you contribute, not from what you diminish in others. Her work at the hospital gave her purpose beyond social status and charity committees. One afternoon, as I was leaving surgery, I found her reading to children in the pediatric ward. She looked up when she saw me, and for the first time, her smile was warm and genuine. "Thank you," she said simply. Not for saving her life, but for showing her that it was never too late to become the person she was meant to be. 3 months later, I received a call that would change everything again. The hospital board's offer was unprecedented for someone my age. Medical director of St. Mary's Hospital, the youngest person ever to hold the position. It meant overseeing all departments, managing budgets, and setting policies that would affect thousands of patients and staff members. Your combination of surgical excellence and leadership during crisis situations makes you the obvious choice, Board Chairman Dr. Williams explained during our meeting. Plus, your recent public advocacy for women in medicine aligns perfectly with our diversity and inclusion goals. I accepted the position with excitement and determination. My first initiative was creating a mentorship program for young women entering medical fields, teaching them never to hide their light or apologize for their ambitions. The program was named Unstoppable after my conference speech. Ryan tried to contact me when news of my promotion hit the local papers. His message was brief: "Congratulations. I always knew you were destined for great things. Maybe we could talk sometime?" I deleted the message without responding. Some chapters are meant to stay closed, and I had already written a better ending to my story. 6 months later, I stood on the hospital rooftop during my lunch break, looking out over the city skyline as the sun set behind the buildings. The view from the top was different than I had imagined during all those years of hiding in the shadows. The responsibility was heavier, but the freedom was intoxicating. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patterson. "Saw the article about your new research grant. $2.3 million for stroke recovery innovation, incredible work, Emily. Dr. Emily Carter." Not the receptionist, not the hidden wife, but the accomplished surgeon and administrator I had always been underneath the careful disguise I had worn for too long. The woman who saved lives, mentored young doctors, and refused to apologize for her success. I thought about all the women who had reached out after my speech, sharing their own stories of diminishment and rediscovery. The emails from medical students who said my story had inspired them to pursue surgery despite family pressure to choose easier specialties. The mothers who had decided to return to school after years of putting their dreams on hold. They had called me just a receptionist. I had let them, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's patience. And when the truth finally comes out, it echoes louder than any revenge could ever be. I walked back inside, my white coat billowing behind me, ready to continue the work that had always defined me. The city sparkled in the distance, full of possibilities and new dreams waiting to be achieved.